Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, today I shall give a talk with a topic entitled Edom in the Nabonidus Chronicle, a land conquered or a vassal defended, a reappraisal of the annexation of North Arabia by the late Babylonian Empire. The interested audience will find a full version of this paper with comments and bibliography in a volume which is about to appear in print, edited by Benedikt Hensel, Ehud Ben-Zvi and Diana Edelmann, dealing with Edom and Idumea in the Persian period. I shall be talking about events that took place under the rule of the so-called Chaldean dynasty, which actually was not all Chaldean in its entirety, and which was in fact not a single dynasty at all. Rather, it consisted of various rulers who came from at least 3 different backgrounds, rulers who in each case took the throne from their predecessors by force. As members of this dynasty, we find Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar, the founders of the empire, as well as the more or less short-lived rulers Neriglissar and Nabonidus. As the very last ruler of this late Babylonian Empire, I am very much inclined to include Cyrus, king of Anshan, the Persian, dubbed today the Great, because only after him the system actually changed and the Achaemenid Empire emerged. After the destruction of the Assyrian Empire and the integration of Syria and Palestine into the late Babylonian Empire, the conquest of North Arabia was a very logical and final step of Babylonian imperial politics in this region. The Egyptians had been driven back by Nebuchadnezzar beyond the border of Palestine at the Brook of Egypt near Gaza. To the east and to the north of Babylonia, the Median and later the Persian empires had established themselves. On land, there was only Arabia left to conquer for the Babylonians. Across the sea, there were the Phoenician colonies in North Africa and Spain. These areas, abroad, had come into the reach of the late Babylonian Empire already during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, when he conquered the Phoenician mother city Tyre. Bypassing Egypt, which had proven to be a bite too chunky to swallow already for the Assyrian Empire, the annexation of North Arabia, taking control over its lucrative trading routes, was a very logical step for the Babylonian Empire to take. But in order to do so, it was vital to secure the areas in the Levant and Transjordan that would lie at the back of the invading Babylonian armies. The trading routes from Arabia into Babylonia through the Nefer Desert had been opened only some centuries earlier in the wake of the domestication of the camel as a pack animal. These desert highways were suitable for camel caravans, but certainly not for transferring troops. The traditional way from Mesopotamia to North Arabia led from Syria through Moab and Edom into the south. That is why the Assyrians and later the Babylonians had an interest in pacifying the desert regions of Moab and Edom as vassals of their empires. When the late Babylonian Empire under Nabonidus finally set out to conquer the trading centers of North Arabia and to integrate them into its realm, it was crucial to have the Transjordan regions as loyal and reliable vassals in the hinterland of the invading Babylonian troops. Nabonidus set out on the campaign into Syria and Arabia early in his 3rd regnal year in 553 before Common Era. He took the traditional way, leading his troops from Babylonia through Syria and down to the south into North Arabia. Nabonidus arrived in the anti-Lebanon region roughly in June. As the next stopovers in December, the Nabonidus Chronicle names Amurru, the west, and Udumu, Edom. Then, apparently rather quickly, Nabonidus led his troops into North Arabia. During the following decade, Nabonidus established Taima as his residential base in North Arabia and roamed the caravan tracks of the region between the cities Taima, Dadan, Fadak, Khaybar, Yadia, and Yathrib, which is of course modern Medina. In the cuneiform record, Edom appears only rarely. In texts from the late Babylonian period, it appears even only once, here in the Nabonidus Chronicle, in the entry dealing with the third year of Nabonidus and his Arabian campaign. Ever since the geographical name in line 17 in this entry had been correctly identified by Albert Kirk Grayson as Edom, this line has been understood as referring to the conquest of Edom by the late Babylonian Empire, at the very latest under Nabonidus in his third regnal year. Other scholars reckon with the growing domination of the late Babylonian Empire in Transjordan and eventually in Edom during the reigns of Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus. The main argument is based on the biblical tradition that, in a fight against Babylon, Judah's cry for help to the kingdoms of the Levant and Transjordan, among them Edom, obviously went unheard. In line 17, the name Edom has certainly correctly been restored by Grayson in his edition of the Chronicles. The verbal form ittadu, however, can only be third-person plural in the perfect tense, which is the normal narrative tense in a main clause in late Babylonian. The subordinative, which could also be interpreted as a singular, would take the preterite tense iddu. So it is absolutely clear that this verbal form does not mean he laid siege against the city of Edom, as several colleagues of the past decades have proposed, but they did. With Nabonidus, however, setting up his camp against the city, one should certainly expect the singular, ittadi. At this point, the traces in line 16 ahead come into play. The line is heavily broken, but the editors Smith and Grayson had correctly identified the signs at the beginning after the break as X and Mu. Paul Richard Berger and Manfred Weipert, however, proposed to read here Tam Tim, the sea of the west, that is, the Mediterranean. After my own collation, however, the second sign after the break is clearly Mu, not Tim, and the preceding sign at the break has the form of a rectangular box with traces of further horizontals matching the sign Ra perfectly. With the preposition ana, we have a clear hint to somebody moving towards or against somebody else. So I propose to restore the lines under discussion as follows. Aramu, Shamat Amuri, Anamat, Udumi Italkuma, Anaal Udumi Itaddu. The Arameans of the west moved against the land of Edom and laid siege against the city of Edom. The clear plural in Itadu, they laid siege, indicates that this was the action of a foreign enemy, in particular one who would not have been credited in Babylonian eyes with a proper king, but acted as a horde. In a Babylonian chronicle, the deeds of a Babylonian king would instead have been narrated in the singular, as I said before. The expression the Aramaeans of the west as opposed to the Aramaeans of Babylonia in the east finds its counterpart in the inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III, who distinguished the Aramaeans from the shore of the sea of the setting sun in the west, from those on the banks of the rivers Tigris and Euphrates on the shore of the lower sea in the east. The city of Edom that was under siege here was certainly the capital. The term belongs to the type main city of a region, such as Al-Yahud, city of Judah, which is Jerusalem, or Rabat Ammon, modern Amman. We are probably quite safe in assuming that this city was Bosra, modern Busayra in Jordan. So, this line provides no hard evidence at all that Nabonidus set out to conquer Edom in his third regnal year. It may rather be read as a report that Nabonidus came to defend Edom as a vassal against the raids of nomadic attackers. The event may have been structurally similar to the situation 100 years earlier, when Ashurbanipal sent out a punitive expedition against the Arabs who had been troubling Assyria's vassal along the borders in Syria and Transjordan, including also Edom. Thank you very much for your kind attention.